Hello, I'm Stacy from Truly Majestic. Let's knit up a cowl. First of all, you need to felt your roving if you are using roving. And then we'll do the single cast on. Because wool roving is so thick, you only need to tie a knot. You don't need a slip knot, just make sure it's loose. And for casting on, the single cast on, we need to twirl the yarn clockwise and then slide the loop on our arm. Twirl the yarn clockwise and then slide the loop onto our arm and snug it up. Not too tight, but just snug. So this is the first half of the cast on. The second half will be knitting through the back loop, which just means hold the yarn in your hand and pull it right through the loop. Hold the yarn in your hand and pull the loop right over the yarn. That is called knitting through the back loop, and that finishes our single cast on. Now we're going to slip the first stitch without knitting it, and then knit the rest of the stitches, which means your yarn goes from the back of the stitch to the front, and that is called a knit stitch. Now I'm going pretty slow just so you can see if you're not familiar with this. You go from the back of the loop to the front with your new yarn, and then put the loop on your arm. That's the knit stitch. For the ends, you need to hold it tight in your hand and pull it straight off. That's how we do all of the ends, and we're slipping it already onto our other arm, and then we're going to knit the rest. And we continue on this pattern all the way till you get to nearly the end of your yarn. I'm going to knit up just a few more rows so you can get the feel of it, and then you'll need to knit on your own until you finish most of your yarn up. Once you've knitted everything up, it should look like this, and we're going to cast off now. We do that by slipping the first stitch, knitting the second stitch, and then slipping the back loop over the front loop. We just continue doing that, knitting one stitch, slipping the next stitch over, and then at the very end we're going to pull all of our yarn through the last loop, and then snug it up nice and tight. Now that the cast on is finished, we want to put the knit side up and the ends together, and then the side that you cast it off needs to half turn like this so the stitches match each other. You should have a set of stitches in the center that look like perfect V's. These are your knit stitches, and you'll be lining these up. Once you line those up, the ends will also line up. So we're going to knit these together by pulling our extra tail through the bottom of the yarn. And it doesn't have to be in any one exact place, but you need to knit it kind of where it looks like it should go and where it's going to be snug. I'm knitting through 2 loops on one side and 1 loop on the other side. Then we go back to the beginning where we first pulled that yarn from and knit it back into that loop. Next we're going to find the V's in the center, and we're going to go to the very base of the nicest looking V from the center. So these are my V's in the center. I need to go to the base of the last neatest V and pull my yarn up through the base of it. Now I go to the other side and I pick up 2 loops of the nicest looking V before the cast off and pull my yarn through those 2 loops and then we're going to go back down through the first loop on the other side that we pulled it through, or the first hole. And we're going to do the same thing for the very end. Just find a place that looks good to come through the side. It's best to go through 2 loops on each side if you can, and then pull it back like we did with the first edge. Now it's time to weave in the tail. We'll do this by turning our cowl inside out, and this tail is too long. Your tail should only be about 6 inches to a foot long, but the principle is the same. You just weave it in here and there until it gets nicely disguised into the rest of your knit. Make sure it doesn't come out the other side. We don't want it in the front of our knit. We like to hide it on the edges, and that's the best place for it. Alright, let's do variation 2. You cast on exactly the same as you do with variation 1, but on variation 2 we're going to slip 1 stitch, knit 1 stitch, and you have these little fuzzies coming off sometimes. It's perfectly normal. They blend into the work. And next we're going to purl a stitch, which means pulling the yarn from the front of our stitch to the back. From the front of the stitch to the back. And then we're going to pull the last yarn straight through the loop and then slip 1 stitch on our other arm. Now we're going to do the opposite. We're going to knit where we purled and purl where we knitted. So this stitch here was a knit stitch. I'm going to purl it now instead of knitting it. And I'm going to pull my yarn right through the end loop like normal and continue on doing the opposite of what's done on the row before. So that's a purl stitch. Now we knit it. The next one was a knit stitch on the last row, so now we're going to purl it. And you carry on this pattern through the entire cowl all the way to the end. And then the cast off and the knitting the ends together is exactly the same as variation 1. You should have something that looks like this, and then when you're finished it should all look like this. Alright, so let's go on to variation 2. The cast on is the same. You slip the ends and we're going to knit through the back loop all of the stitches, which means pulling your yarn straight through all the loops like we do on the ends. Slip the first stitch of every row, pull all the yarn straight through the stitches, which is knitting through the back loop. And you have these bits again that come here and there. If your yarn is felted better, you won't have that, but this yarn is really lightly felted. It should be felted more than this ideally. The cast off and the rest is exactly the same as the first one. You should have this when you're finished. Happy arm knitting from Truly Majestic.